This week on Under the Radar, the gap that never goes away. I of course refer to the gap between people who understand basic math and those that don't. Or perhaps it's the gap between those that do understand basic math but deliberately misrepresent it for political purposes and those that don't. It's probably a bit of both to be sure, but the gender pay gap is an issue that just never seems to go away, but it really should. And the rhetoric around this issue has now reached bizarro world proportions. Take, for example, the reporting around Iceland's new equal pay law. Iceland becomes first country to legalise equal pay. What? Kennedy signed into law the Equal Pay Act in 1963. In Australia, it took another decade. What is actually a first here? A new law making it illegal to pay men more than women has taken effect in Iceland. The legislation, which came into force on Monday, the first day of 2018, makes Iceland the first country in the world to legalise equal pay between men and women. No, it doesn't. Under the new rules, companies and government agencies employing at least 25 people will have to obtain government certification of their equal pay policies. Those that fail to prove pay parity will face fines. Well, great, that should create some more government jobs and more red tape for companies to deal with. And here's a very revealing statement from a member of the Icelandic Women's Rights Association. It's a mechanism to ensure women and men are being paid equally. We have had legislation saying that pay should be equal for men and women for decades now, but we still have a pay gap. So let me translate that for you. It's been illegal to pay men and women differently for the same job for decades, but it hasn't produced the equality of outcome that our communist ideology demands. And here's a little history on equal pay in Iceland from that same Icelandic Women's Rights Association. Equal pay legislation for over 50 years. Iceland has had legislation supposed to guarantee equal pay for men and women for a very long time. In fact, we passed the first legislation mandating equal pay for men and women in Iceland over half a century ago in 1961. At the time, the members of Alþingi were hopeful that full pay equality would be reached in only 6 years in 1967. Unfortunately, economic gender equality was not reached in 6 years. Notice the sleight of hand here. What actually is economic gender equality? We've now shifted to equality of outcome from equal pay for equal work. So we in Iceland passed a new Comprehensive Equality Act in 1976, and one of the articles stated that women and men be paid the same for work of equal value. Alþingi passed yet another updated Equality Act in 2008 with the same provision that men and women be paid equally for equal work. Still, men are still being paid more than women, despite legislation which is supposed to guarantee equal wages. So successive pieces of legislation reinforcing the same concept of equal pay for equal work still hasn't resulted in your communist utopia of equal outcomes. So let's quadruple down. Great idea. And are men really being paid more than women, or are they earning more than women? This is a vital distinction that needs to be made. This is where I'm not sure if people are just functionally innumerate or deliberately conflating equal pay for equal work with equal outcomes, which is what the gender pay gap represents, or as it has been rebadged here, economic equality. I feel ridiculous for even having to make this argument. It doesn't matter if you have equal pay for equal work, you're still not going to get equal outcomes. If you recognise that men and women on average do different kinds of work different hours, have different qualifications and experience, have different motivations and interests, then it's illogical to think you would get equal outcomes. And Icelandic society is no different in this respect. Have a look at the gender breakdown of men and women in different industries. Women make up more of the professional workforce, but they're also overrepresented as clerks and underrepresented in trades, plant machine operators, and management. Look at the kind of qualifications men and women are obtaining in Iceland. Women dominate 6 of the 8 categories, but not engineering, science, and computing. Overall, men work 22% more hours a week than women, reducing to about 12% for full-time work. But of course, at this point, the ideologues have to shift the goalposts. The gender pay gap adjusted for working hours is now 16% in Iceland, but the unadjusted gender pay gap is much higher. The average wages of women in Iceland are only 72.5% of the average wages of men. One of the main reasons women work fewer hours in Iceland than men is that women are performing unpaid labour in the home and for the family. We at the Icelandic Women's Rights Association believe that we need to look at the larger unadjusted figure to measure the gender pay gap, not the lower figure adjusted for working hours. Yeah, I bet you do. So just to be clear, the adjusted pay gap takes into account the fact that men work more hours. But that's not good enough. We need to shoehorn in unpaid work in the home to make it sound even worse. Now, if you're married or in a cohabitating arrangement and you think domestic work is holding you back from doing more paid work, then the answer is simple. Don't do it. But here's what's never addressed by any of these ideologues. Perhaps this is the arrangement individual couples have decided on for a reason. One person is going to do more of the domestic work because the other puts in more hours at the office. People choose these arrangements because they work. And if you're not happy with the arrangement, then renegotiate it with your partner or leave. No one is forcing you to sacrifice career for domestic duties. But all of that's irrelevant anyway. You still haven't demonstrated that the gap is due to women being paid less for the same work. Iceland has had equal pay legislation for more than 50 years. Making companies endure more red tape to get useless government certifications to prove that they're paying men and women equally is not going to result in the desired equality of outcome that these communists want. What is fascinating is that this issue has gotten to such absurd levels. I mean, when this new measure inevitably fails to get the desired outcome, what are they going to lobby for next? Get the government to mandate that men work less hours, or get the government to interfere with the domestic lives of couples? Maybe the government will start asking households to report how many hours a week of domestic work they're doing and then fine the men who aren't doing an equal amount as their partners. That might sound nuts, but is it? As Milton Friedman noted, this is what happens when societies become obsessed with equality. You have to curtail people's freedoms to achieve it. And remember how full pay equality was supposed to be achieved in Iceland in just 6 years following the 1961 legislation? Well, the government is aiming at closing the gender pay gap by 2022, so in just 4 years this time. Good luck with that. The other point I think is pertinent here is the complete willingness of men to roll over and take it like the good little cucks that they are. And this is one reason I have absolutely no faith that the march of the equality ideologues will be stopped, because men are too weak and pathetic to do anything about it, and not just in Iceland. Iceland aims to close gender pay gap, provide grants for international equality efforts. Iceland is committed to closing the gender pay gap by 2022, building on its proven track record on advancing gender equality. Its new session of parliament has the highest share of women parliamentarians yet, at about 45%, and 6% of Icelandic men are he-for-she champions. Wow, I thought Sweden was bad. Iceland is determined to encourage more of its countrymen to sign up and will also encourage males around the world to do so and engage in achieving gender equality. Parliament has confirmed a huge increase for funding issues of equality. To celebrate the 100th anniversary of women's rights to vote and stand in parliamentary elections, Iceland has set up a 5-year equality fund and pledges that over half the grants will be awarded to international equality efforts. Speaking at the Global Leaders meeting on 27 September 2015, Prime Minister Fat-Faced Cuckboy said, "Men cannot sit idly by when issues such as gender-based violence and the gender pay gap are being discussed. These are not only women's issues, these are issues of general human rights." And there you have it, the male shaming tactics, delivered by another man, although I don't want to assume his gender. Men need to step up and help women achieve equality because women are strong and independent and don't need no man. And never mind that they do have equality already, men now need to ensure they get equality of outcome, despite working less hours and in lower paying occupations, because equality. Well done, Iceland. Consider yourself officially cucked. So as usual, leave your comments below, and especially if you're one of the 89 Icelandic subscribers to this channel, it would be interesting to get your take on your government's latest initiative. I'll see you next time.